Welcome to Better Sex, where you get the information and inspiration to create and enjoy your best possible sex life. Join your host, sex therapist Jessa Zimmerman, as she brings you expert guests, helpful tips, knowledge, and strategies to improve your intimate relationships. And now, your host, Jessa Zimmerman.
Hey, it's Jessa. Welcome back to another episode of the Better Sex Podcast. And we have an interesting conversation today that directly relates to better sex. I sort of think they all do, but this one really does. That was a whole point of her research. Dr. Tara surveyed, I think, more than 5,000 people to find out what correlates with better sex, better sexual satisfaction. And we talk about all these different results, but I'll give you a hint. One of the biggest thing was sexual communication, and that is outside of sex itself and inside of sex itself. Across the board, couples that are open and communicating about and during sex highly correlate with satisfaction. So we're going to talk about her study. We're going to talk about all the different things she found that correlate and how they all go together and what you can start to do to start to have better sex. Enjoy. And before we start the show today, it is sponsored by Intimacy with Ease. It's a method to help otherwise happy couples achieve a sex life that is easy and fun for both of them, so that you can actually just enjoy your sex life with zero stress. For more information, if you want to watch a brief little training video that's available, all of that, go to intimacywithease.com. So Dr. Tara, welcome. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Of course. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. So how do you want to sort of tee up this study that you did, right? Because I think there's probably a lot to talk about with what you got from that. But tell us a little bit about what made you think of it, what prompted you to even do the study, and how did you do it?
Yes. So my area of research in my field, which is human communication, is relational communication. Mm-hmm. And as I teach this class at Cal State Fullerton, go Titans, as I teach relational communication as well as sexual communication, I always get this question from my students: how do I have better sex?
Right.
And when I teach sexual satisfaction and, I teach the concept and I teach research findings, they always ask me, I still don't get it. Like, how can I know? Like, what can I do to get this like sexual satisfaction that academics love talking about? Right. Yeah. So I embark on this journey of, I want to try to find interpersonal communication variables and so like psychology, like intrapersonal communication variables that will strongly predict sexual satisfaction in the long run. So with quantitative research being my method, I started an online survey a couple of years ago. And I mean, there's, also COVID as another factor that came into play. So I have to talk about that as well. But yeah, I started this survey and we basically, me and my team collected online survey data for the last couple of years. So we were able to have over 5,000 people that took this survey, and through running some stats, not going to bore you and your audience with that. We learned that one of the strongest predictors of sexual satisfaction for people in a relationship is sexual communication. And a lot of studies found the same thing. So if anything, this study like replicates other findings. However, I do want to talk about like what kind of sexual communication, like what does it mean when people say sexual communication?
Well, and I want to back up a second. What does it mean when they say sexual satisfaction? Is that just them rating themselves on a scale of 1 to 10? Like it's subjective to each person?
It is. It's through a valid and reliable measurement. So there is a sexual satisfaction scale that we use and we test it statistically and it's reliable, but it is self-report.
Yeah.
So that's the one limitation is that it's whatever that person is feeling at that time.
Right.
While they take this questionnaire.
Okay.
The items on questionnaire, what it gets to is that you feel good about your sex life, that you feel satisfied, that you feel like you have great sex, that you feel like you and your partner have great sex.
Well, and that's really what matters, right?
Yeah,
I mean, that is subjective. It doesn't matter what somebody else thinks about your sex life.
I love when you said that because, like you would read like an article from some website and it would say like, you should have sex 3 times a week. Like happy couples have sex 3 times a week. But I think at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter. It's your subjective evaluation of your life, right?
Yeah, right. And it's not like all about orgasm, for instance, if they said, 95% of the time you should orgasm or something. It's really about whether you want that.
Right. Yeah. And if you find pleasure in other things too, right?
Right.
Yeah. So in this measurement, it's subjective and it's more vague. So I like that. Mm-hmm. So I didn't measure it based on like how many orgasms did you get?
Right.
This measurement is like, I have a great sex life, 1 to 5.
Yeah.
My partner and I have great sex, 1 to 5. So it's kind of your subjective evaluation of your current situation. And these are the people that are in romantic relationships.
Right.
And when we talk about sexual communication, what does that entail? So in the measurement that we use, it's 2 things. One is sexual communication. That's like sex talks in your relationship. You're able to talk about sex in your relationship. And I mean, based on your professional experience, like a lot of people don't talk about sex in their relationship.
Yes, I do.
Like that's not even a question that they ask their partner or talk about. Some people have been in a relationship 30 years, never once talked about sex.
Right.
Based on our data, that's not good.
Yeah. It doesn't correlate with a satisfying sex life. Yeah.
No, having a great sex life correlates with having sex talks.
Okay.
The ability to, talk about sex in your relationship. So a question on the survey would be like, I can easily have a conversation about sex with my partner. Mm-hmm. And then you scale 1 to 5. So that's about sex talks and the comfort and the ability to have that sex talk in your relationship. The second part about sexual communication is communication during sex.
Yeah.
How much you're able to express yourself verbally and non-verbally. So this is also a part of sexual communication. So it's really 2 things, right? Like micro, which is like in the moment, and then macro, which is like in the relationship.
Right.
And that's a strong predictor. Another strong predictor, and these 2 account for like a lot of percentages predicting good sex, is sexual confidence, which comes from sexual self-esteem. And I think it's really interesting because when I ask my college students, what is sexual confidence? They tend to think of like, if it's a male, then it's like, an alpha, like someone who has sex all the time, and someone who just talks about sex, like is very aggressive with sex. Or when they think of female, they think of like Beyonce, right? Like they don't necessarily think about the concept of sexual confidence in depth, or like that you're content with yourself, or that you feel good about yourself, or how you view your body. It's typically like the outward projection of someone who's confident. So it's really interesting, but in how we conceptualize it is internal, is how you feel about yourself.
So that's the sexual self-esteem. That's internal, and the confidence is how maybe you reflect that out in the world.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So how you feel about yourself sexually, how you feel about your sexuality, how comfortable you are with your body, all of that contribute to how confident you project yourself sexually.
What were some of the questions you asked to get at those insights?
So sexual confidence is like, I feel good about my sexual skills, or I feel confident during sex. I have no problem having sex with a new partner, things like that. So that would be like sexual confidence.
Yeah.
The sexual self-esteem would be things like, I have a positive feeling about my body. I have a positive feeling about my sexuality. I don't have issues with how I view my body. Mm-hmm. I feel good about my sexuality, or I am comfortable with my sexuality.
Right.
Yeah. So these things then contribute to how you project yourself, confident, not confident, sometimes confident. And then that then predicts sexual satisfaction as well. The cool thing is preceding all of this, we tested one variable that it's been talked about for a very, very long time. And you talk about this as well. And Dr. Lori Brotto does experimental research on this, is sexual mindfulness.
Yeah.
And that kind of precedes everything.
What do you mean by precedes everything?
Like it comes, like it's an antecedent. It comes before everything. Like first practice sexual mindfulness, then you feel better about yourself, then you project more confidently, then you can communicate, then you have great sex.
Right.
Yeah. So sexual mindfulness was a powerful variable that we looked at. And, being someone who I'm into mindfulness stuff, like I'm into meditating every day. It makes me feel good. I teach my students and my friends to meditate. I journal. So like practices that are considered mindful practices, I'm already doing. But what I have like kind of dove into deeper last year was sexual mindfulness.
Is that just being mindful during the act of sex, like being just really present in the moment? What's happening?
It is that.
Okay.
Yeah, it is that. Being extremely present, basically being consumed by the moment and feeling all of your senses.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been trying to get like super into that intentionally.
Right. And I'm hearing that you're testing all these variables, or you figured out these things that correlate with satisfaction, but I also think they correlate with each other. Like, I don't know if there's any data with that, but if you don't feel very good about your body, maybe you're going to talk about sex less, right? Or if you don't have that sexual confidence, like I'm not touching that subject.
Right. You are completely right. And when we look at the big picture of this model of like what predicts what, they all have relationships with each other.
Yeah.
Some moderate, some strong. Yeah. So like all of this have to happen.
Right. Was there one particular factor that stood out more than the others, or it's just really a whole system that has to work together?
Yeah. So interestingly, for a direct prediction based on our regression analysis, for a direct prediction of like much better sex or great sex is sexual communication.
And did one type over the other, or are they equally important?
They're equally important as like a variable. So inside that, there's meta communication, which is communication in relationship. And then there's verbal, nonverbal. As a whole, like as a scale, it's an important factor.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think most sex educators and therapists have talked about this for like years. It's nothing new, right?
Right.
But yet like just millions of people are still not doing it.
Yeah. So what kind of suggestions do you have for people then? How do they put this insight into like, okay, now what do I do?
Right. My first thing that came to my mind about sexual communication is it's not something that you can force on people. So really the first step is being aware that like, okay, I want to improve my sex life. I want us to have better sex. Let's start. Let's get on this path. Because often, I think like there's no point for me lecturing about how important sexual communication is. Listen, communication is extremely important. You have to communicate. At the end of the day, it's really a personal choice to have better sex.
Yeah.
So for those of you that are listening to this podcast, I'm sure you're on that path because you're already listening to a podcast, Better Sex, right? So how can you use sexual communication to your advantage to maximize this situation is to schedule regular sex talks. And I should call them sexy check-ins. To do this regularly, as in like do this, if you feel like monthly is too much, I would say like do this every 3 months. Mm-hmm. And a sexy check-in can be so simple. Go out for a date, right? Get dinner, maybe a glass of wine. And then, hey, like, how are you feeling about our sex life? Authentically saying, like, if you have a concern, I'd like to hear it, right? And also model this behavior. If you have a concern, maybe you share first. Like, hey, I just feel like lately you've been on your phone a lot and maybe not very present when we're trying to get intimate. Like, is that something you can be aware of and maybe use your phone less? So really like to have this sexy check-in, it's the first step is to set the environment, right? Okay, we're going to have a sex talk. And then perhaps communicate if you have certain concerns. And then also, because I'm a quantitative researcher, I love ratings. So I asked my partner for just this month because like sex fluctuates. Yeah. And I think the first thing to accept is like, it's okay. Sometimes 1 out of 10, maybe your partner says 4 or 3 because it's a shitty month. Right. Yeah, like life fluctuates, sex fluctuates. So I think just to honestly get in touch with each other and say, hey, like if you would rate like this month, our sex life, or the past 3 months, what would you rate from 1 to 10? And, sometimes if my partner's like 7, I'm like, okay, like what do you think I can do more or better to get us into the realm of 8 to 10? Right. So that's something I strongly encourage everyone always.
I would imagine, though, that I know this actually from the couples that I work with, that people avoid that conversation because they're afraid they are going to hear bad news. They're going to be either hear criticism or despair, and they don't know what to do about any of the problems. Like how would you invite people into that conversation when it might be obvious they are having some sexual struggles? So it's not totally satisfying.
Honestly, if you're in a long-term relationship and you do have sex issues, a sex therapist or like relationship therapist is the first place that I would go. I typically recommend seeing a relationship with sex therapist and then reading, because these are the first places that you should go to learn about what is it that is truly going on. Because a lot of times sex issue is not just sex.
Right.
Like, this, you've worked with this for like,
it's almost never sex.
It's something else. So it's easier to have, it's not an easy task ever, but it is easier to have a third person, a professional kind of probe the couple through questions to get a feel like what is truly the problem here.
Yeah.
And I typically say that if I have a friend who's been married 12 years and it's like, we don't have sex anymore, and ask like, Tara, what do I do? And I said, to be honest, like as someone who researches this, like I know that you guys have a problem, but I would say that perhaps it's not even just about sex, like perhaps it's something else. And I highly recommend like couples counseling or sex therapists, relationship therapists, and you will learn a lot.
Yeah.
I would say that that's the first step. And then reading and mentioning like, hey, I read that if this is happening, we should be doing ABC. Can we try? Or how to open up a sex conversation could be things like, I know that you care about our relationship. I know that, I want you to know that I'm in this 100%, but there is something going on that's bothering me. And I would really appreciate a quiet time where we can talk about these issues. And I think honesty a lot of times can work, even though the other person may be very uncomfortable or even worse, like maybe in denial, like I don't see any problem.
Right.
I'm sure based on your experience, this is common.
Yeah. Hey, just a quick little break in the show because I have something to offer you. If you have ever sat with your partner and you kind of run out of things to talk about that are not, work, the kids, money, logistics, who's doing what's happening this weekend. If you are looking for a deeper way to connect, have conversations that build intimacy, that build awareness, of yourself and your partner, I have daily conversation starters for you. You'll get them via text message every day, and then the two of you can have a more interesting conversation than maybe what you've been doing. All you have to do is text me the word topics to 206-309-8645, or look in the show notes. There's a link there. But text me the word topics, and you will start getting those every day. Now back to the show. Well, and I love how you framed that too about coming in. Hey, I'm totally in this. I'm not, like coming from a positive place.
Yeah.
It makes such a difference in setting these conversations up for success.
Totally. And in our field of human communication, we talk about positive sexual communication. And it's extremely important because sexual communication is very vulnerable. Yeah. Sex is vulnerable, right? And so a lot of people are very taken aback by negative comments or criticism, especially when people are angry and they say things like, oh, you never ABC, right? Yeah. You never go down on me. You never care if I orgasm. Language like that will not invite any kind of open conversation.
Right.
Yeah. So positive sexual communication entering conversation would be key.
Right. The sexy check-ins. I mean, what do you sort of suggest for people that are newly in a relationship? Like, it's one thing you've been together a long time. Let's meet every quarter. Have the sexy check-in. But what about getting this communication off, from the very beginning of a new relationship?
Yeah, I think in a new relationship, it's very interesting because a lot of my students they're college students. So they are in some type of new relationship. I often tell them, when you go on a date, like ask these 2 questions, because this could become extremely valuable when you know you've been together 3, 5, 8 years. And the first thing is to get at their sexual attitude. So like the first thing is, how do you view sex? Like, what's the point of sex? Right. So maybe the other person's like, well, I think sex is just for two people to connect. I don't think it's everything. I don't think it's that important when two people have connection. Then you know that sex isn't their top priority.
Right. Right.
But if you're talking to someone, hey, like, how do you view sex? Like, what's sex to you? And if they say like, oh, super important. Like, I want to have a good sex life. Like, I want to have great sex until like I'm older. Like, that's what I want in partnership, like in a relationship. Then you know that that's their top priority.
Right.
So I think this conversation will change the potential and like the future, if you will, of this relationship, because too many times, and this is people in their 30s and 40s that have been together a long time, they have never asked this question.
Right. And they might have come in with very different priorities, right?
Totally. Yeah. And then later, 10 years later, they realize, whoops, we have very different sexual attitude. For one person, it's bottom of the list. Other things come first. Maybe even like intellectual intimacy comes first. But then for the other person, second on the list, what do you do? How do you reconcile?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think new relationship, extremely important that you ask this question. Get it over with. Because what if you're so different in that arena? Like, can you accept it? Right? Like, then you have to decide, can you accept it?
Yeah.
Another question that I think is important because it becomes a problem later is sexual preference. Is how many times do you think a couple should have sex in a month? Right? Might seem like a little out there for first or second date, but I do think like getting it over with is great. Because what if the other person said, what if you're someone that like, oh, I want to have sex at least like once a week? And what if the other person says, well, it's not that important. I guess like once in every 3 months is good. Then you know that that's not something that you can reconcile with. Who knows, right?
Yeah. But I also think, my brain goes to it. That answer changes over time. Like that's one point in time when you're 25 years old, maybe. And then you may have a very different answer to that question 10 years later, 20 years later.
Totally. And that is where the sexy check-ins come in.
Right.
Yeah. Right. So first ask these like introduction questions at the beginning of early dating. And then once you're exclusively dating, I would say every 3 months, ask the sexy check-ins. How are we doing?
Yeah. Okay. So what about the other kind of sexual communication in the moment during sex? Like what kind of tips or suggestions do you have for people to get more comfortable with that?
Yeah. The one thing that I often say is I do sexual mantras, like positive sexual affirmations every single day in the bathroom. A lot of people don't believe me, but I swear in the morning after I brush my teeth, I'm in the bathroom by myself and I look at myself and I say, you're an amazing lover. Sometimes I say, you're great at sex. Or you're very sexy. And then I listen to music that I love and I feel my body. I feel great. Right. Yeah. So that's a part of my like repertoire, a part of my routine. And that helps me, that like positive sexual affirmation as a part of just my morning routine. It helps me share more during sex. I used to be very quiet. Like I grew up conservatively in a Thai family. I'm originally from Thailand. In my culture, sex is super taboo. Right? We don't have like cool parents that talk about sex stuff. Like it's super taboo. We never talk about it, especially for girls. You should never be sexually active because that's a slut or that's like a bad woman. You would never want to be that. So when I was young, I had a lot of sexual anxiety because I had a strong sex drive. When I was like, I don't remember, like 11, maybe I already wanted to masturbate. Like when I was 11, I was already touching my clitoris and like, ooh, that feels good. And ever since then, like as a teen, like I would masturbate like clitorally because that felt good for me. But then I had always had mad anxiety when it comes to having sex with a partner. Yeah. So for my first few partners, sex was never amazing. Sex was just okay. And in retrospect, I don't think it's their fault because my partner was really into it, but I wasn't. Yeah. Yeah. I was worried. It's like, oh, do I smell bad? Like, what does my body look like? Like, I never really experienced that much sexual pleasure when I was younger.
So I imagine that those mantras or affirmations, that's sort of targeting your sexual self-esteem, right? To build up that sense of confidence. But what else can help people actually like say something about, I want this, or would you do that? Or
during sex, right?
Yeah.
Yes. So verbally, you can express pleasure. So say things like, oh, that feels so good. Oh, I love it when you do that. Ooh, can you do that again? Can you go deeper? Can you go faster? That feels amazing. Things like that. So you can express these things verbally. If you also want to do things like adoration during sex, you can also say, oh, you look so good right now. Or you look so hot right now. When my partner goes down on me, I go like, you're so good at this. Right? Positive sexual communication in the moment. You know, I gotta
and helping your partner's sexual self-esteem, right?
You're
totally adding to that.
Positive cycle. I love adoration. And you know, when I talk about this on my TikTok, which I have like a little like sex and relationship TikTok, I have a lot of comments saying, oh, that's childish. Oh, that's just for young people. I disagree. I think that when we get older and become more mature, we forget to be two things, playful, and we forget to adore, right? Because we think these are like children things. And I completely disagree. I think we should never stop adoring each other and communicate that adoration. So during sex, I go, oh, you're so good at this. Or when I look at my partner meaningfully and you're so attractive. Like, yeah, you're so sexy. Love your hair. Anything that was in the moment feels right for me. Yeah. So adoration is great. Sharing pleasure is great. Non-verbally, there's so many things you can do that feels natural to you. But those of you that feel like, well, I don't really know what to do, right? One thing that is really hot, I think, is to grab really hard. To grab their arm, maybe like to grab harder to like show that, oh my God, this feels good. Right. Another thing too is to like play with their hair. Other than that is kissing, licking, playing with erogenous zones.
Yeah. Part of what I'm hearing here is that people don't need to be super explicit or use language that maybe they're not totally comfortable. There's a lot you could say or do that would be sort of innocuous, but you know, in the context of sex would still be adoring or be communicative, but it's not like we have to use these scientific words for body parts that feel clumsy or something like that.
Totally. Yeah. I think a lot of people have a misconception of also the other way around. Like you have to do like dirty talk. You really don't have to. You don't have to swear if you don't feel like it. You don't have to say, you don't have to dirty talk if you don't feel like it.
Yeah.
Things like adoration, I think can be very sexy. And like your partner will go, ooh. Right? If you're like, oh, you're so good at going down on me. And if you've never said that, and if you do, I think your partner will like that.
The other part of the communication that comes up for me is the idea that I want people to be empowered to ask for what they want. Mm-hmm. So not just appreciate what is happening, but also to be able to say, I actually would like this, or could you go slower, or could we switch positions, or could, something.
Totally. And when I teach sexual communication, we talk about narrating and directing. So like narrating is, oh, this feels so good, or like, I love it when you do that, right? But then directing is like, oh, can you stay in there longer? Oh, can you go faster? Ooh, slower. Maybe like, ooh, can you lick here? Can you touch here? Can you grab here? Of course, like asking these things is a huge part of you achieving sexual satisfaction with your partner. Again, your partner cannot read minds.
I have to tell people that all the time.
Yeah.
They're not supposed to read your mind. Yeah.
Yeah. They have no idea. Like tell them what feels good for you. And if you don't know yet what feels good for you, you got to learn. Self-explore, masturbate. You got to learn your body to be able to direct the other person to pleasure you.
The whole narrating and directing, I like that concept. And it seems like it's so important that we can do both, right? There has to be a balance of those things. Yeah.
A lot of young people do tell me though that, and I think older people too, that they feel so awkward, either narrating or directing, just communication, any kind of communication during sex, that they have like quiet sex, right? Yeah. What do you think about that? Like, what do you tell people that say like, we just have quiet sex?
Well, I mean, the first place my brain goes actually is it's like maybe they learned to do that because the kids were like right in the next room. But
Yeah,
I think what I would say is start with just one little noise. I mean, it's not like you got to change the whole way of being. It's like just make one little nice moan or one that feels good or one, and it's something we're going to have to practice to become comfortable with it.
Yeah, I love that. And small steps too.
Yeah.
If you've been quiet all your life with all your partners, like you don't have to be speaking bam, 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 super dirty, like porn star type, right? You can totally start with like, moaning or just that feels good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
I also think, maybe starting with the check-in, talking about sex outside of the bedroom and outside of the moment might be an easier place. I don't know. I guess people might think the other way is easier. Whatever's easier for people to start, start there.
Literally start anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. I completely agree.
Any other tips or suggestions you have? I think I forgot to ask you.
I would say, we already talked about how important like sexy check-ins are for people in a relationship, sexual communication, asking questions early for people that are dating early. I would say 2 things that you can do that you can improve your own sexual self-esteem and confidence and like feel really good about your sexual self is sexual meditation and journaling. I do think, sex is a lot of times a partner thing, but sex is, to me, 70% yourself, 30% your partner. Are you comfortable sexually? Like, are you even comfortable with your own body, right? With yourself as a sexual being? A lot of people grew up conservatively or religiously and were taught to never be sexual. And then you get married and then you have sex and you expect to be really good, right? So I think just work on yourself and be with yourself and be good sexually with yourself first.
When you say sexual meditation, do you mean something like mindful masturbation, like actual physical touch and being present with that?
Yeah. So if you Google sexual meditation, there's a lot of guided meditation that comes up for you to do various things. One of them is mindful masturbation, but then there's also like sexual meditation, breath work. There's also sexual guided meditation for touching, like haptics. There's a sexual guided meditation for visualization.
Okay.
So there's all kinds of meditations, but they're sex related.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So I have that on my channel. If you go to Love Bites by Dr. Tara, you should be able to find a few sexual guided meditations. These are new that I created last year, but gosh, so many people that came before me created really, really good sexual like guided meditation that I use too. So I love that. I think it's a great practice. I started doing it the whole year last year, and it's significantly improved the way I feel about my sexual self.
All right. So that's a nice segue into where can people find you? What should they be? Where should they go to learn more, to connect with you, to take advantage of some of the stuff you have to offer?
Yes. So my website is lovebites.co, LUVBITES.co. So that's my website. You can find all my information on there. All my social media are also lovebites.co. So my Instagram, my TikTok, they're all on lovebites.co.
Okay, great. I'll put those in the show notes too, so people they don't have to write this down while they're driving or something. So.
Lovebites.co. Thank you so much, Jessa.
You are welcome.
You've been listening to Better Sex. Please visit our website, bettersexpodcast.com, for show notes and additional episodes.
And that's a wrap for today. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, if some of this material resonates with you and you would like to make a difference and make sure that this keeps coming out in the world once a week, ongoing, there are a couple things you could do to show your appreciation. The first would be to go to iTunes and rate and review the show. That really helps us be found by new listeners when you review the show on iTunes. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/iTunes. The other thing I want to invite you to consider is becoming a Patreon. For a small monthly pledge, you get some benefits. So for $2 a month, you get advance access to every single episode. For $5 a month, you get a chapter of my upcoming new book. And for $10 a month, I host quarterly get to know you and question and answer chats over the web, and you get invited to that. I would love to have your membership in that, become part of the Better Sex family. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/Patreon, which is Patreon. Again, thanks for listening. I'm glad you're here. Feel free to comment, ask questions, get in touch. I'd love to hear from listeners. Thanks.